Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you will gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you're not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself. We're glad you're here. Today, we are speaking to Alison Lawler-Dean, a Toronto-based marketing and communications executive who is sharing her caregiving journey with us. In her early 40s, she was simultaneously raising her 9-year-old daughter and caring for her 79-year-old mother. Alison knows firsthand the demands of being in the sandwich generation, as well as the grief that comes with losing a parent. After the passing of her mother, she was inspired to create Papillon, a transformative platform dedicated to guiding families through the complexities of end-of-life care. Since then, she has dedicated herself to curating invaluable resources and fostering a supportive community. Through Papillon, she strives to make the journey a little lighter for those navigating this deeply emotional time. Alison, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this whole platform and stimulating the conversation around caregiving. It's so important, and I found that out, unfortunately, the hard way. So I'm so glad we can create resources that hopefully will make the journey a little easier for others.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do. And I can relate to what you're saying, because when I was, helping to care for my father, I didn't know where to look. So I'm so glad that the OCO has created this podcast and all their other resources, so people can easily sort of look to people that they can share a story with or find a peer support or anything like that. And I'm sure so many of our listeners are going to find something that resonates for them in your story. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I wanted to start with the question, when were you aware of, or when did you become a caregiver, in your opinion?
It's a good question, because I think one day it just kind of dawns on you, right? It happens
Hmm.
slowly over time. You go from your parents being the ones caring for you, and you just don't even realize when that shift starts to happen. Um, I read a really great book along the way. I'll probably be dropping a lot of names and
Sure.
and
Yes, please
resources
do.
as we chat, because they became such a lifesaver for me, and a big inspiration behind Papillon was just to share that knowledge. But there was a book called Working Daughter, and she has this concept of the creep and the crisis when it comes to caregiving, right? You kind of like creep along and you're like, oh, their health isn't so good, or oh, they might be forgetting things, or just little experiences are slightly different with your parents than they had been. And then all of a sudden there's some crisis that like just wakes you up and makes you kind of look around and realize like they have a fall, or there's like, some sort of, memory issue, or something that is, on a more serious level that makes you realize, wow, they need a lot more care, and we maybe have to kind of change this relationship. And I think that's kind of what it was in my experience. Wanting to support my mother's like living independently as much as possible. um, we lost my father. I lost my father about 7 years ago
Mm.
now. My mother's been passed about coming up on 2 years. So I do think there was a difference without him in her life, in her daily life, obviously, in her decline. And so naturally kind of stepping in a little bit more when she had lost her partner, as a daughter. Both my sister and I kind of stepped in a little bit more. But those last 5 years of her life, I think it really just started to amp up. Like every, 3 months, there would just be a fairly drastic shift in what she needed in terms of care. Um, and this is all after, I mean, she lived with cancer for about 20 years. So we were super lucky, even more than 10 years since it kind of had metastasized and spread from her lungs to her brain. So we got so much bonus time that she never thought, and we never thought we'd have with her, which was a real blessing. But then what comes with that, and I think this is something and why I'm so passionate about talking about it, I think more and more of us, as healthcare improves, more and more of us will be living with our parents longer, but helping them manage the side effects of being alive longer and managing disease. So that was really the case with our mom's cancer. The cancer, in the end, we didn't fully take her the side effects of living with it and being on incredibly strong
Mm.
medications, I think were really kind of what took her out in the end. So yeah, I think it is going to be a more common occurrence for more and more of us as the healthcare system and people are living longer and managing disease longer.
There's so many points that you've brought up that I want to dive into individually. But in the intro, we talked about or I mentioned this idea of the sandwich generation, which is not a new thing. It's certainly been brought up before, but some stats are that 51% of caregivers find themselves as part of the sandwich generation, meaning that they're caring for children under the age of 18 as a parent, and then they are caregivers to a parent or an in-law at that time. So particular to that, and I can identify, I was helping to care for my dad while my son was between 2 and 6 months old. So that was
That's
it
a
was a
lot.
lot of new. It was a lot of new all at once, but not that it's easy at any time. So in a way, I do identify that way as well. But are there particular challenges that you can highlight that you faced as this sort of sandwich generation member? And how did you manage caring for both your child and your parent and sort of managing your time effectively that way?
I can't say I did it well, but I'm happy to have some lessons and some maybe hard lessons kind of learned that hopefully I can kind of share with people. It was really hard, I'll be
Mm,
honest, and I think a
yeah,
lot of the time I felt really alone, which is why again I'm just so pleased we can have these
yeah,
conversations and hopefully amplify them to let people know you're not alone. So many of us are going to go through this, or are about to or going through it now. Um, initially I think I thought because my mother was a little bit older when she had my sister and I, but now again, we're seeing the demographics shift. So this is going to be more of a reality of people. But a lot of my peers, a few peers had lost parents a bit more suddenly.
mm,
Heart attack or something that, just comes is a bit more of a surprise. And obviously loss around that is incredibly difficult. But the slower decline, there wasn't, most of my peers weren't facing it yet. So I didn't have kind of a model to look up to or people to really ask
mm,
questions. I was kind of the first one going through it. And even when I looked at, my mom's peers and again, some of my friends' parents, my mother, I think because of having living with cancer for so long, she seemed a lot more aged, I think, towards the end than they did. So I could see
mm,
some people at the same age of late 70s, like still very vibrant and out and
mm,
about. So it, again, it did feel isolating at times. I definitely kind of felt overwhelmed. My daughter growing up a little bit and starting to get a little bit of independence there, which was great. But my career, I think the other big piece that's in the sandwich generation is
right,
you're often really in like the height of your career. Um, and I don't not only did I not have my mom or parents or other relatives to help with the childcare, so I
right.
could be out and about, meetings, demanding travel, all the things that kind of come with demanding careers. I had to also again be home, so found that pull extremely hard, and just really through it all, I think wanting to find just time for me in it because that I think was just so hard. Then also kind of
It's so
feeling
important.
guilty about that,
Yeah.
like there were just so many conflicting feelings that now looking back with a bit more fresh perspective and obviously a little less of the intensity of all the emotions that come with it when you're in the thick of things, knowing again that's real, that's reality, that's what so many of us are going to go through. Um, and yeah, we just, we need to find the moments of calm, find the moments for ourselves, like, anything that we can do to survive it. I think in some ways it's hard. And I think like acknowledging that it's hard work is okay.
Yeah.
Because not only, raising little humans and then supporting our elder humans is a difficult thing, but I think especially the way society is now shifted, right? We live more likely with our nuclear families. You may not have, your extended care network in the same way. So I really kind of through all of this definitely advocate for people to rebuild that, right? Rebuild the communities and the network of people that you have that can help you and help, your loved one that you're caring for and kind of share some of that weight.
You bring up such a great point about your career, and I know enough that to know, that your career is very important to you. It's very demanding. You're very successful, and when you start to talk about the layers of, your career, caring for a parent that is very ill, and also having a child, and also just trying to find that little sliver for yourself. I mean, it just throws the concept of what is work-life balance? Really, what is that? It just sort of throws it right out the window. So has it changed your perspective on how you approach that, when you're looking at in terms of your life, in terms of your colleagues' life? Has it changed your concept of what that is?
I think it has. Yeah. Even just the concept of work-life balance, like there are times it's just not going to be balanced. Like you can't
No.
really seek balance, can't be your goal. I
And
know
that also
people,
shouldn't feel like a failure.
no,
Saying, because I think we've been set up to feel that if we don't find this magical work-life balance, we're just not doing it right. And sometimes it's just not
totally.
possible,
Wait,
right?
again, I think we have to shift maybe the expectations a little bit around that, right? Like, there are going to be really tough moments in your life. Like, I wouldn't change being there for my mom because I got all that time back, right?
Mm,
But that also meant that isn't probably the time of my career when I can excel. So there was a moment, at a former job where I was up for a potential promotion, and it wasn't possible.
yeah,
I couldn't go for it. I honestly don't know if I wanted it. I couldn't
right.
give any more time to that area of my life. Um, and it kind of just also shifted. I think, when you're losing someone, it also shifts things in your mind in terms of, do you want to be spending this much time and energy on your career, because the time with people is so fleeting. And I think again, when you're faced with someone with cancer and their life winding down in front of you, I definitely knew that was then a moment for me to renegotiate, how I wanted to work. And I definitely
Mhm.
kind of looked out for a different way of working in my next kind of opportunity. So it could reset, I think, my priorities a little bit.
Yeah.
I've always been incredibly ambitious. I'm very passionate about my work. I am, but I think there are different ways that can show up at different times in your life, and those different kind of seasons. And so, yeah, with a younger daughter, and when I was in the thick of care, it was just like, I can't do all of these things right now. And eventually, I think I also realized, again, one, it was okay, like you said, and two, I don't have to do them all, right? Like, again, I'm not going to get this perfectly balanced. I'm spinning a lot of plates right now. Something's got to go. And so focusing in on where I did want to spend my time.
It actually I mean, for me, I can relate to that because we lost my dad a bit over 8 years ago, and my son was obviously a baby at the time, but it's changed the way I want to also show up. Even though, I don't have my dad anymore, it's changed the way I choose to show up. I carry that with me into the decision making that I have in terms of that whole work life balance thing. So I really do get what you mean. Like, it informs the decisions that I continue to make in my career and in my life. And that's my work life balance, because I'm making those choices informed by something that's really important to me.
Absolutely. And I think I first realized that, again, in the caregiving space, and then in creating Papillon, which goes through, end of life and caregiving through death, and then, trying to live on past that and getting through grief, and celebrate celebrations of life, and ways to memorialize the people that you loved. I got really into the death space, and there's a wonderful kind of positive death movement out there. It's another thing I'm really passionate about, is we need to talk about that and make death less scary.
Ooh,
And that was
yeah.
a real inspiration for the site, because if you're scared of talking about it, you definitely won't be prepared for it.
Mhm.
But there's also a beauty in death, and in the lesson that it kind of, again, shows you about
Yeah.
how precious time is,
Yes.
right? If you don't think about it and you want to pretend that the people you love aren't going to die, spoiler alert, everyone will. So if you try to fight that, you actually are maybe taking the time away that you can be spending with them, and remembering that every moment is so precious. So the more I spent thinking about death, kind of the more positive I felt about life. And that's something I'm really,
Great.
passionate about, and want to advocate for it, and to take a concept that I know is so scary for so many, because of course, losing people is devastating. It's going to hurt. You can't change that,
Right.
but the fear around the death itself can lighten and hopefully make space for something a little more positive.
I really do wish I could go back and have that feeling, because I think it stunted my ability to have some of the discussions, not all the discussion, but some of the conversations I should have had maybe 8 years ago or 9 years ago. So it's such, I'm so happy that you've created this platform, and we'll dive into it a little bit more. And I really love, I feel like there's great pieces of advice that you've worked in terms of people trying to find this sort of balance in their lives when they're caring for a child and caring for themselves and their career and caring for a loved one that might be ill. So I think there's a lot that people will take from that.
Working caregivers are ordinary people providing physical, mental, and emotional support to a family member, partner, friend, or neighbor while balancing workplace demands. There are ways to better support caregiving employees so that they can continue to share their valuable knowledge and skills in the workplace while caring for those who need them. Our suite of tools and resources provide you with key tips and strategies that can be built into existing workplace initiatives, providing benefits, and finding the right solution for you and your employer. To download our toolkit or to learn more about our resources, visit ontariocaregiver.ca. And now, back to our episode.
I want to talk about your family now. I want to talk about your mom and your dad. So can you tell me a little bit more about them? I know that you were a
Yeah.
caregiver for your mom for a long time. So what can you tell me about her?
Yeah, I was really lucky that I was very close to both my parents. We grew up in a really small, wonderful community on Toronto Island. A little bit.
Okay. I'm with you.
Start when we
I'm
talk
with
about
you.
this, and um, it's also really fresh because
Yeah.
Toronto Island lost a really beautiful landmark over the
It
weekend to a fire, and
did.
it's the home of so many celebrations, the celebration of life for my mom, big
Oh,
birthday
I'm
parties, milestone
sorry.
birthday parties for my parents, and lots of
Okay.
special places. So I think
Yeah, it's
everyone's
fresh.
just feeling a little close
Yeah.
to the
It's
surface.
okay.
But yeah, we were a really close family. My parents were really different, which, is always so funny when you're growing up until you kind of realize how sometimes life partnerships can be, and sometimes you need that balance. But my dad was incredibly smart, but quite introverted, voracious reader, just loved to learn about things and kind of share those ideas and passions with us. A bit more kind of like a gentle giant kind of guy. Um, and my mom was incredibly vivacious and outgoing, huge social circle, really involved in tons of community and social justice and just tons of work. Did incredible work on Toronto Island to help build the land trust and
Mm.
community monuments there. Volunteered a lot of her time to a bunch of community and international organizations, and just learned so much in terms of leadership and passion and giving back from her. And so they were huge, influences in my life. Um, and my dad, they both had been diagnosed with cancer over the years. My mom earlier, and she used to always joke that she was preparing my dad to live on his own without her. And then she, went into remission for a little bit, and he was diagnosed initially. But again, got through that and was seemingly healthy, and then he got a re-diagnosis, and passed away 2 weeks later. It was
Wow.
so fast,
Yeah.
not expecting it. That the doctors, remember us kind of reading through the words that the doctors use when they talk to you about it, right? They're like, we think he has a few weeks. And I was like, oh, okay, it probably doesn't mean more than 8, because you might say months, and
Right.
analyzing all of those little nuance to kind of get to what that. But in the end, it was just about 2 weeks.
Mm.
Um, but it also meant, like, we took that time off. I
Yeah.
actually remember, because he seemed quite healthy through it. We didn't realize he was so close to the end on those kind of final couple days. Um, but I took time off work and was just with him. It was the summer. It was beautiful. We were in the home that we kind of had grown
Mhm.
up in and that they still lived in. And we were just really together. The day before, we were drinking rosé on the porch. He was having a little trouble walking,
Yeah.
but otherwise, and he was sleeping a lot more, but otherwise, we really didn't know how close it was, right? I don't think you realize these things. And then just in the last 24 hours, things progressed and he, started to slip away. It was beautiful though. It was really peaceful. We held his hands, and we said goodbye. Which also I think just really flipped on my head this concept of death being a beautiful moment, right? Again, it's devastating he was gone, but I'm so grateful we had those moments. I'm grateful I was there. So started to kind of build a little bit of comfort out of that with the concept of death. And that was a good death. Now that I see so many, right? He was in the place of his choosing with the people around him that he loved, and he wasn't suffering. And I hope that death for everyone. So we were really lucky there. And then as I said a little earlier, after that, I think, and without having him as a constant, my mom's health just started to decline a little bit more slowly. She eventually didn't live on her own much anymore, at least initially, first not in the winters, and then started to live with me. And so we built a little kind of suite in our house for her so that she could be closer to us, living with me kind of day to day, but my sister coming in and out and helping her a little bit. And mostly that was just, companionship and light things. And then the care really started to increase. And I remember one of the hardest things was like, we just didn't know, and I guess I'm a bit of an A-type, bit of a planner. I was like, what's next? What's going on? And we talked to the doctors. And again, there was, she started to have trouble walking and some memory things, like just little pieces kind of, starting to decline. And, everyone's like, no, that's not what it is. And, we couldn't really get an answer. We couldn't pinpoint. She was just starting to wear away. And the last year was really hard. It was really getting to more, almost 24/7 care. There would be times she'd fall in the night. We'd be woken up and I have to help. And, just really, I think a little bit, again, out of our depths. It's one of the things, again, I now know a little more and try to, share the knowledge of the more that you can understand a little bit more what might be coming and plan for that next inevitable thing rather than hoping for the best. It's almost like plan for the worst, whether it's, getting safety equipment in a house or setting people up or getting extra supports or caregiving to come in, whatever you can afford or whatever access you have to some of the free services out there, like anything that you can do to kind of get ahead of where things are going, I think can really go a long way. Again, I think lots of people by nature are optimists and you just, it'll get better. And, but once it starts to decline, it usually continues to decline. And so, anything you can do to get a little bit ahead and plan for what might be around the corner, I think definitely sets you up for success.
Would you say that, it sounds like there were but different challenges that you had towards the end of your mom's life. Would you say for you, the bigger challenge was because of how you've described yourself, the, oh my goodness, I don't know what's next part? Was that harder for you? Or is that sort of intertwined with she's having these events where she's falling or things happen? Like, what did you find to be the biggest challenge at the time?
I think it was, the fear of the unknown, kind of what's going on was a big one. Wanted to help her get better. She wanted, again, she kept thinking, oh, just have to get through this and then we'll get back on track. And, especially things like when she was having trouble walking, I was like, oh, I'll do some exercises and I'll get back there, as opposed to, she never really got there. We had to get her more equipment, scooters, and then, an electric wheelchair and some other supports. The unknown was really hard. The stress around it, the feelings of being completely overwhelmed and then feeling really guilty about that because, I want to help her, but then it's also really hard. That was, a whole piece. And then I'd say there's probably a third pillar in there. And that's, now I know the term is kind of anticipatory grief, but also, realizing that she's slipping away in front of me. And you're watching it kind of happen in slow-mo. But also she was slipping away in so many ways. There was, right to the end, like the day before, the day even that she passed, she was still, so funny and witty and like you could see that personality come through. But there were lots of other times where she was just starting to change, right? she had one point towards the end, there was some cancer that was, in her cheek. And so they were radiating her brain, and that, did some things to her cognition, and she got a little paranoid. So like there are changes to a personality.
Yeah.
And so you're also just was grieving the mom, that took care of me. And I was grieving the person that I had known for so long, all while she's still there. And it's like, you should be appreciating every moment, but the moments are changing. And so, yeah, that was, I think, equally hard.
I think it's important for everyone to hear these things that you have said, because it's okay to have all the feelings which none of us feel. I shouldn't say that. Not none of us. I think many of us, I can relate, feel my dad would be like, why are you here? Go be with your baby. Go be with you. You know what I mean? It was that kind of thing. And that was his way of dealing with things. Based on what you said about sort of things changing with your mom, were you able in towards the end to have those sort of difficult end of life conversations with her? Was that something that you felt that you were able to do, or even just like advanced care planning or anything like that? Was that something that you found you were able to do with your mom?
We were really lucky because she was quite open to the conversations, I think, overall.
Mhm.
So that's helpful. I definitely know now not everyone has that. There are
Yeah.
certain people and parents that will just be like, shut it down. There were times, I think less when we were really actively caregiving, but there were times through her cancer experience where I know she sheltered things from us, trying to like keep us protected,
Mhm.
to like to be that parent and not have us worry and not maybe tell us things or not want to talk about things. But as we got to the end, I think, we were pretty open. We also, asked her outright, can we be on the calls with the doctors? Can we be there? Can we hear it with you? Because especially again, and sometimes her memory was faltering, we just wanted to make sure we had
Yeah.
other record of kind of what things were happening. So kind of we took
Sure.
a more active place there. Um, I don't think I knew all of the choices and options you can have at end of life though. And again, that's
Mhm.
something that I tried to create lots of
Yeah.
questions to ask yourself and tips and ask yourself and your loved ones on the site on papillonpassing.com. Because I don't think I knew what we maybe needed to ask her and to get clarity on. We knew her general wishes for sure. And started to talk about more things. In the end, she chose to end her life with MAID, with medical assistance in dying. So that was something we
Mhm.
talked about. But even then, over the months, her feelings on it would change, and so we'd have to kind of ride with that.
Yeah.
I think again there were like lots of times that she would be quite hopeful that things would turn around and this was just a phase. And she again, because she lived with cancer for so long, it's like, and there's so many incredible treatments, we're like, we'll get back, right?
Mhm.
And then I think there was a moment when it dawned on her that there wasn't kind of getting back to a place and what
Mhm.
she would consider was a really strong quality of life. That is a conversation to have with people, right? What does quality of life mean for you?
Oh, so
You
many
know,
conversations. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
What do
important.
you want towards the end? And then, all the technical stuff too, in
Yeah.
terms of, we knew where her will was, paperwork, those wishes, how did she want to be celebrated after? But there are so many things I think to ask, even where you want to be. I think that is a big one. Again, with my dad, we were so lucky because his health was in a pretty stable period up until he passed. But for many people, like I've seen stats that 70% of people want to die at home, but only about 15% do, right?
Right.
So because they usually can't, because you need a ton of equipment to
Right.
set someone up if their disease is advanced or they have a lot of side effects to manage. So, really preparing for that in advance, knowing that that's a priority, then you have to do some extra work in advance to make that a priority for your loved one. So yeah, she was open to the conversation, which we were really grateful for. But it's still, again, to know what all those things are, to go through them, to document them, to make sure that we're really clear on all of them is super essential. And one tip I give out to people, if maybe your parents or your loved ones are not so open to talking about it, is use me or use anybody as an example. Create a fake friend, and just kind of say, oh, Jane's parent died and we didn't know that they wanted to be cremated. And they really struggled with that. I'd hate for that to happen when it comes to you. Like, I know you don't want to talk about it, but if we talk about it, then, talk about it once, get it all documented, and we don't have to talk about it again. But just really make sure that you try to stimulate that opportunity, and to do it as early as possible, because the conversations get harder when the emotions get heightened as you get closer, right? So if you have the opportunity to do it when your loved one is healthy, you might not be listening to this podcast if your loved one is healthy, but hopefully you are getting really ahead of things. But yeah, as early as you can have those conversations and just get things clearly laid out and documented, so you really know, and then you can help make all the choices to set them up and really fulfill those wishes.
Are you a caregiver in Ontario looking for information, advice, and support? Managing Care is an online resource that can help you connect with other caregivers and provide you with helpful resources, such as respite services, financial support, and more. With Managing Care, you can receive invaluable support and guidance to make your caregiving journey easier. Visit ontariocaregiver.ca to learn more. And now, back to our episode.
Ollie, there's so many things that we are told when we're dealing with grief, sort of how we should be, or there's a framework to how grief works or how it should be dealt with. And it's such an individual thing. And I know that you've found so many things along the way on your journey that have helped you, that you wanted to share. Can you tell me a little bit more about those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two concepts that I've really gravitated towards around grief. The first one being that, grief is complicated. As you said, everyone has their own journey with it. And that's totally normal. Grief is normal. You're not, I hate to say it, but you're not going to get over it overnight, and that's okay. Or maybe, and there'll be times where it'll absolutely lighten. But I think in the grief world, there's an early, concept of these stages of grief, and that you would just get through it and be done. But if this person meant a lot to you, you're probably not going to fully get over it. And so that leads to kind of the second concept that I just, really gravitate towards, which is that grief is love. There's a really wonderful book called Grief is Love by Marissa Renee Lee. But I actually kind of really got impassioned about it in an interview by the actor Andrew Garfield, when he said how much he loved to talk about his mother, who he had just lost. And he was on the Stephen Colbert show, and Stephen, saw him tearing up and said, if you don't talk about it, you don't have to. And no, I want to, and I may tear up, and that's okay, because when I feel these feelings of sadness, I know it is just my love from her kind of coming to the surface. And that's how I feel. And it has been such a comforting thought to bring with me when you get to those moments where you're just really missing the person and just feeling that sadness, which you will for probably a very, very long time, just to reframe that as, a wave of love, and just remember how much they meant to you. I've found so much comfort in that concept. So, yeah.
I remember seeing the clip from the Stephen Colbert show, and it just stopped me in my tracks. And it's like, it just felt so incredibly wise. And we're always telling, oh, I'm sorry that I feel, you know what I mean? It's like, no, this is a normal thing to feel, talk about it. So I'm actually so glad that both of those people were open to that idea during that interview, both as the host and the interviewee. But yeah, that's a lot of great resources. And I think it's not something we plan to go through, but we all go through at one point or another. So it's really important, because you've experienced the loss of your parents. Anything else that you would suggest as advice to someone that, has been a caregiver that is also struggling with the potential loss of a parent, or the actual loss?
I were to kind of sum up the tips kind of through all of it, whether again you're in active caregiving or getting really close to the end, again, I think the closer you get, there's that call to almost like sit at vigil at the bedside, right? But unless someone makes a decisive decision of choosing made and picking a time and date and place,
you don't know.
You don't know, right? And you're really leaving it up to nature, whatever you believe in. And that can be so hard. So take breaks, take what you need, share the load, make
Yeah.
sure that you're calling on a variety of loved ones to be there for you, to be there for your person. So lean on people, talk to people about it. And that was really hard at first. I couldn't find a lot of people who had
Ooh,
shared experience, but I definitely found a lot of sympathetic ears, which were
that's
great.
good. Yeah. I found a
Um,
few conversation stopping incidents where I was like, my dad has lung cancer. And they're like, great. And,
yeah,
moved on and they didn't want to say it. So I'm glad that you were able to find, I'm not saying everybody was like that, but
not everyone's
not
like
everyone,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you did. So that's good.
But
Find
and
those.
then find groups, right?
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
can, right? All these incredible organizations will have groups that you can join where there are people that are just in that same space as you, and you can get right into it, even for after they die. I really champion. There's death cafes where you can just go and talk about death.
That's a
Whatever stage
thing.
you're at, if you've lost someone or if you're just interested in the topic, of which there are many people, there's cafes, they meet monthly all around the world, virtual, in person, and just talk about death as a concept, just again, building that comfort in it. So
Ellie, I
yeah, so
had no idea that was a thing.
I'll bring you
I'm
to one. We'll
learning.
go to one
Okay.
together. They're
Okay.
again
Okay.
surprisingly uplifting when
Yeah.
when you get to talk about something that is so often put into the darkness and the shadows, and it's like, let's bring a little light to this. It can really leave you feeling much more positive. So talk to people about it. I'd say, when it gets to the heavy lifting of caregiving, outsource whatever you can. I know it's a privilege to even be able to do that for many people, so it might not be possible, but again, different, and here in Ontario with our healthcare system, they'll give you some hours with caregivers that can come in and help bathe a loved one or just give you a little bit of a break, or a little respite from some of the more hands-on tasks that obviously come with caregiving. So whatever access you can get to give yourself a break. And then I think, oh yeah, kind of coming back to that point around educating yourself, right? Like
Mhm.
what disease do they have? What does that progression maybe look like? What are some things to look out for? Try to don't get to that place where it just creeps up and then you hit that crisis point. Like what
Mhm.
can you maybe plan for a little bit more and get ahead of it? I know with my mom, because she was so independent and such a powerful woman, it was really hard for her to get to the point of, realizing she needed different mobility aids and
Mhm.
some of those different pieces. And I think a lot of us, never want to feel like we need them. So it would take a lot to a lot of conversations and a few extra nudges to be like, I think it's time, right? We need the cane, and then we need the
Yeah.
walker, and then we need the scooter, escalating along those things. So yeah, so kind of planning ahead. Um, and then again, just some of those acknowledgements, right? Like I wrote a list on Papillon in terms of like just some things to remember, that like it is hard work. This is hard being a caregiver again, and we're not as a society really set up for it the way we would have been a few
Mhm.
hundred years ago, where we had bigger communities around us to help share the load. So it's okay to acknowledge that it's hard and that you may be struggling. Um, the other one was that the illness is not the person, right? Again, as there may be
Mhm.
side effects that may be really changing the personality of your person that you love, and to separate those two. And
Yeah.
I think I always worried, is this what I'm going to remember, right? Some of those really difficult moments, is that these, because they were so vivid at the time, but
Yeah.
I can say, and I'm sure you can too, looking back, those kind of, it's like childbirth or other things, you kind of just gloss over that and get
Yeah.
right to, more of the warm and fuzzies and all the wonderful, strong things of the people that you love. And so you can kind of separate that. And yeah, those difficulties that you're going through, don't change that. This is a good and, incredible thing that you get to do, to be the caregiver for your person. And that is, again, like, okay to feel that pain and loss even before you've lost
Mhm.
them. And you might. So yeah, and there's so many of us going through this, and so many more will. And so yeah, look out for each other and know you're not alone.
Absolutely. Well, and on the topic of that, and on the topic of resources, and on the topic of resources and finding community and finding information and finding ways to feel seen and heard and less alone, let's talk about Papillon. Let's talk about what you've created and what led you to create this platform. Tell us a little bit more about it.
twofold, I would say. One was just again that real need of searching for things, right? Like they say, one of the highest times in a woman's life that she Googles is right after she has a baby, and you're like, what is going on? And I think the second one is maybe caregiving,
Yeah.
or they might be tied. I just remember Googling everything. What is this? What is this sign? Why her eye did that? What's happening? Where do I get this? How do I get help? How do, resourcing? How do I hire a caregiver? All the things, just like constantly like looking for the answers and not really finding them. I think a lot of information out there is either kind of very clinical or medical. And then a little later, again, in the journey or more in the death space, some of it can be very religious. And those languages I would say didn't speak to me. I'm a marketing communications person. I'm in branding. And so there wasn't a lot that kind of felt really modern and polished and spoke to me in terms of like really understanding who I was as a person. So I tried to kind of balance with Papillon, this brand. I treated it as if I was working on a CPG brand or a fashion brand or something else that I've worked with on in my career. How can I brand death a little bit to make it palatable to people like me and hopefully, educate them and get them to consume it in another way.
Yeah.
So really looking at it again, taking a bit more of a modern approach to it, trying to take some of the fear away from it, right? In how we talk about it, being a little bit more direct, and then the whole brand and the kind of experience of the site. So that was one element. And then just, okay, I want to curate bullet point, short paragraphs, just easy to digest information of like, read this, listen to this podcast. Really like this video, just trying to make it as easy as possible. Again, knowing how much people have on their plates when they're at this life stage. Break it into like almost little chapters. So again, nearing end of life, from caregiving right up to those final days, and in and around death, how to plan for death, make sure you've got the choices again outlined for the person and be there through it. And then, how to navigate the grief and living on after. So those are the three main chapters of the site. And then just little information, again, trying to break it down into little piecemeal, little things that I've found really helpful. Lots of great books, TED Talks, videos, podcasts, just different things that can help give you some more pointers and tips.
Okay, so you've got the stages, people that can find sort of something for themselves at each stage in terms of the supports, and also resources that you're suggesting, like you said, books, podcasts, things like that, TED Talks, that are going to be there for them if they need something to look for as a resource. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
What are your hopes for the future of this platform, of Papillon, and sort of its impact on the end of life care landscape? Because I got to tell you, I hadn't heard of anything like it when I first found out about it. And I was like, oh, this is genius. So do you feel like you're breaking ground? Where do you feel that you want to go with Papillon?
I just want it to be there for whoever needs it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm hearing such great feedback from the people who are finding it that, oh, this is exactly what I needed. And thank you. Or, people will reach out and I'm like, oh, here you go, this page. And just, this is where I've kind of outlined it. Or, just really able to kind of help point people in the right direction, which is the idea. Again, as soon as I was going through it, again, it's just my nature. I was kind of starting to document, like, I got to remember this. And, the site kind of started as a Google Doc that I would just kind of thought I would just share with friends, because even, when we were in the thick of it, people started to be like, oh, okay, so-and-so's parent or my mother-in-law, or, people coming forward that they were starting to experience this. So I know, I'm like, okay, everything I've learned, I'm just going to have to pass it on. And then I realized, yeah, with my, my branding and marketing and communications experience, I'm like, I can just do this. So created the whole site, spent hours writing, which was just a real kind of like passion project and a bit of a labor of love. Interviewed a bunch of people, reached out to authors of the books I loved and spoke with a bunch of them, and just, got a little bit more background for a lot of the areas of the site. But yeah, I really just want it to be there for those that need it. It doesn't have any huge ambition other than I just hope it helps people along the way. And again, lives up to its mission, just to make this really difficult time a little bit lighter for
Well,
everyone going through it.
it's incredibly generous of you. And I know, I'm sure that it was, I don't know if I want to say cathartic, but there's probably something that felt good about taking experience that you had and putting it out into the world to help others that might, because I think when we're in those stages of our lives, when we're up in the middle of the night Googling, because either, those kind of situations, you sort of just want to feel like you're not the only person going through this, right? You want to feel less alone. And I have no doubt that people that come to Papillon find something that makes them feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
So, and then incredible resources that they can take away. So on that point,
That's the idea.
yeah,
When I first ideated it, and maybe still in the future, in terms of, meetups or more services and offerings. At one point I thought, that's it, I'm going to make this my career. But I realized, this is my passion, and, I can do a day job elsewhere and pour, my heart and soul into this, and just, and kind of have both of those. But yeah, I'm open to any ways that it can help bring people together, and definitely want to foster that community. Has a pretty active presence on Instagram as well. So
Right.
at Papillon Passing, which is just a quick way to kind of share ideas. And again, with that, definitely obviously dips into this whole caregiving space, and talks about death, but with the real mandate too, just to try to break it down a little bit of that fear,
Yeah.
and just remind people some of the good lessons that we, learn in the unfortunate nature of loss. So yeah, so a little bit more lighthearted, I'd say, on the Instagram side, and then definitely get into the details, of what to expect a little bit more on the site.
And remind us of the website again.
Papillonpassing.com.
Amazing. Well, Ali, I think that you are proof that you have been a beacon of life and light on the subject of death, which proves that there can be positive conversations around it. So I thank you so much for that. I thank you so much for introducing me to Papillon, because I think it's just an incredible resource. And it's so generous of you to share this with the world and to take the time to chat with us today. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details about support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you have been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.